I stopped explaining myself a long time ago, not because I became arrogant, not because I stopped caring about people, but because I finally understood something that changed everything. Most people don't ask for explanations because they want to understand. They ask because they want ammunition. They want to find the flaw in your reasoning so they can feel better about their own choices. They want you to justify yourself so they can measure whether you deserve what you have. Just you tonight, not to the crowd, not to the noise, just the person who has felt the exhaustion of defending every decision, the person who has wasted energy trying to make others see what you already know to be true. If you're listening, leave one word in the comments. Elon Musk. That's how we recognize each other in this community. The ones who stopped performing for approval. Let me tell you when it started. When I first realized that explanation is not communication, it's negotiation. And I was not interested in negotiating my reality with people who had no intention of joining me in building it. The moment I stopped, there was a time when I believed transparency would earn me understanding. I thought if I showed people my thinking, my process, my reasoning, they would see the logic. They would respect the decision. They would trust the direction. I was wrong. What I learned instead was painful but necessary. People don't want your reasoning. They want your compliance. When someone asks, "Why are you doing this?" what they often mean is, "Convince me why you should be allowed to do this." It's not curiosity. It's interrogation. It's not interest. It's judgment disguised as concern. I spent years answering those questions, explaining my vision for SpaceX to people who had never built anything beyond a PowerPoint presentation, explaining Tesla's strategy to people who thought electric cars were a joke. Explaining why I work the way I do to people who measure success by how early they leave the office. And you know what I discovered? The more I explained, the more they questioned. The more transparent I became, the more they doubted. Because explanation to the uncommitted sounds like justification. And justification implies uncertainty. So I stopped. Gradually. Not politely. I just stopped giving my energy to people who were never going to understand anyway. And something shifted. The moment I stopped explaining myself, I stopped being drained by other people's limitations. I stopped giving them access to my decision-making process as if they had earned a seat at that table. I stopped performing clarity for an audience that was never going to see past their own projections. That silence was not arrogance. It was boundaries. It was self-respect. It was the simple recognition that not everyone deserves an explanation, not because they are beneath you, but because they are outside the context. They don't have the information. They don't share the vision. They don't carry the responsibility. And without those things, your explanation won't land anyway. It will just be noise to them. The cost of constant explanation, here's what nobody tells you about explaining yourself constantly. It trains you to doubt your own instincts. Every time you stop to justify a decision to someone who has no stake in the outcome, you are asking yourself, am I sure? Do I need permission? Should I wait for consensus? And those questions, repeated enough times, become corrosive. They eat away at the clarity that made you capable of deciding in the first place. I have watched brilliant people destroy their own momentum because they needed everyone to understand before they moved. They needed approval. They needed validation. They needed the crowd to agree that their path made sense. And while they waited for that agreement, the opportunity passed. The moment closed. Someone else, who didn't need permission, took the shot. There's a reason why most major innovations are not committee decisions. It's not because collaboration doesn't matter. It's because true progress requires conviction that moves faster than consensus. And conviction does not pause to explain itself to every skeptic it encounters. It moves. It builds. It tests. It iterates. And if it works, the explanation writes itself. If it doesn't, the explanation wouldn't have mattered anyway. I learned this the hard way. Every time I defended a timeline, I lost time. Every time I justified a risk, I diluted the focus I needed to manage that risk. Every time I tried to bring someone along who didn't want to come, I slowed down the people who were already running beside me. Eventually, I realized that my energy was finite. My time was finite. And I could either spend it explaining to the skeptics or building with the believers. I chose the latter. That choice cost me relationships. It cost me reputation in certain circles. People called me difficult. They called me closed off. They said I didn't listen. What they really meant was I didn't obey. I didn't stop when they wanted me to stop. I didn't slow down so they could feel comfortable. I didn't shrink my ambition to fit their appetite for risk. And because I didn't do those things, they felt excluded. They felt disrespected. But their feelings were based on an assumption that was never true. The assumption that they were entitled to an explanation in the first place. Who actually deserves an explanation? Let me be clear about something. I'm not saying you never explain yourself. I'm saying you become very selective about who earns that explanation. There is a difference, a massive difference. And understanding that difference will change how you protect your energy. The people who deserve your explanation are the ones who share the consequence. If your decision impacts them directly, if they carry weight in the outcome, if their success is tied to your clarity, then yes, explain. Be transparent. Bring them into your reasoning so they can move with confidence. That's not weakness. That's leadership. Leadership. The person on Twitter with 47 followers and an opinion about how I should run my companies. They don't get an explanation. The journalist writing a hit piece from a position of zero accountability, they don't get my time. The family member who asks, when are you going to get a real job? While I'm building rockets, they don't get access to my thought process. Not because I'm above them, but because their question is not genuine. It's not rooted in curiosity. It's rooted in discomfort. And I am not responsible for managing other people's discomfort with my choices. See, this is what I learned. People who genuinely want to understand ask different questions. They ask, how did you decide that? Not, why would you do that? They ask, what did you see that I'm missing? Not, don't you think that's risky? The tone is different. The energy is different. And you can feel it. When someone genuinely wants to learn from your experience, they approach with humility. When someone wants to challenge your right to make that choice, they approach with judgment. I started paying attention to the energy behind the question. And once I did, it became easy to know when to engage and when to walk away. If you're asking because you want to grow, I'll talk for hours. If you're asking because you want to tear down, you'll get nothing from me. Not anger, not defensiveness, just silence. Because silence is the most respectful way to say, you're not ready for this conversation. The trap of over-justification. There's a psychological trap that catches ambitious people. It's the belief that if you just explain well enough, clearly enough, thoroughly enough, people will finally see what you see. You think the problem is your communication. So you refine your pitch, you add more data, you build better analogies, you anticipate objections. And still, they don't get it. Still, they doubt. Still, they resist. And here's why. Because the problem was never your explanation. The problem is that some people are not listening to understand. They're listening to find reasons why it won't work. They're listening to protect their worldview. They're listening to avoid the discomfort of admitting they don't have your courage. No amount of clarity will penetrate a closed mind. And a closed mind often disguises itself as a curious one. I used to think everyone operated in good faith, that if I just presented the logic, people would follow the reasoning. But that's not how human psychology works. People make decisions emotionally and then backfill them with logic. And if your decision threatens their emotional equilibrium, their sense of what's safe, what's normal, what's acceptable, they will find reasons to reject it, no matter how sound your argument is. I stopped trying to convince. I stopped trying to win people over. I stopped treating my life like a courtroom where I needed to present evidence for the jury's approval. Instead, I started moving with the assumption that my decisions were already valid, not because I'm infallible, but because they were mine to make. And the outcome, good or bad, was mine to own. That shift in posture changed everything. When you stop over-justifying, something interesting happens. People either respect you more or reveal that they never respected you to begin with. The ones who respect you stop questioning and start watching. They become curious about the results rather than critical of the process. The ones who didn't respect you become louder, more aggressive, more insistent. Because your refusal to explain feels like a loss of control to them. And it is. They no longer have influence over your choices. They no longer get to slow you down with their doubt. Let them be loud. Their noise is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to the vision, to the work, to the people who are actually building beside you. Everyone else's scenery. Scenery doesn't get a vote. When silence becomes power, I want you to understand something fundamental about power. Real power is not loud. It doesn't need to convince. It doesn't need to defend. It simply is. And it moves. When you stop explaining yourself, you reclaim a type of power that most people never access. The power of certainty without permission. Think about it. When was the last time you saw someone at the top of their field explaining basic decisions to strangers? You don't see them doing that. Not because they're rude, but because they understand that explanation dilutes authority. When you're constantly justifying your choices, you signal uncertainty. You signal that you're seeking validation. You signal that your conviction is negotiable. But when you move with quiet certainty, when you make decisions and let the results speak, people pay attention differently. In you. They stop seeing you as someone they can influence and start seeing you as someone they need to understand. That shift is everything. It changes the dynamic from you seeking their approval to them seeking your insight. I noticed this shift in my own life. The moment I stopped explaining Tesla's production targets, every analyst who doubted them, they stopped treating my words as debate points and started treating them as data. The moment I stopped defending SpaceX's reusable rocket vision to people who said it was impossible, they stopped arguing and started watching. And when we landed that first booster, I didn't say, I told you so. I didn't need to. That's the power of silence. It lets your work do the talking. It lets your results validate your reasoning. It forces people to reckon with outcomes rather than opinions. And outcomes don't lie. Outcomes don't care about anyone's feelings. They just are. And when your outcomes consistently prove your reasoning, people stop asking why you do things they start asking how. But to get to that point, you have to be willing to move in silence. You have to be willing to be misunderstood. And results require focus, and focus requires that you stop spending energy on people who don't matter to the mission. The people who will always doubt, here is a hard truth. No matter how successful you become, no matter how many times you prove your reasoning, no matter how clear the results are. Some people will never believe in you, not because of anything you did wrong, but because your success confronts something in them they don't want to face. Maybe it's their own inaction. Maybe it's their own fear. As fear. Maybe it's the choices they didn't make because they were waiting for permission you never asked for. Your existence becomes a mirror, and mirrors are uncomfortable for people who don't like what they see. So they reject the mirror. They reject you. Yeah. And they will use every tool available to discredit your path, because accepting it would mean confronting their own. I've seen this pattern repeatedly. The same people who mocked Tesla in 2010 are still finding reasons to doubt in 2020-25. It's not about the data anymore. It's not about the results. It's about protecting the narrative they built to justify their own skepticism. If they admit, I was right, they have to admit they were wrong. And for some people, that admission is too expensive. So they double down. They move the goalposts. They find new objections. They stay committed to their doubt because their identity is now tied to it. You cannot win those people over. You can't explain enough. You can't succeed enough. You can't prove enough. You can't prove enough because they're not evaluating your actions. They're protecting the ego. And the ego doesn't respond to evidence. It responds to threat. And your success is a threat to their story. Once I understood this, I stopped being frustrated by persistent critics. I stopped trying to change their minds. I stopped giving them space in my thoughts. They became, not because I dismissed them as people, but because I dismissed their opinion as a factor in my decision-making. They were welcome to their doubt. I was welcome to my direction, and those two things didn't need to intersect. This is a lesson most people learn too late. They waste years trying to convert the unconvertible, trying to earn respect from people who will never give it, trying to prove themselves to an audience that has already decided they don't deserve success. That's it's unnecessary. And it's unnecessary. Because for every person who doubts you, there are 10 who are quietly watching, quietly learning, quietly waiting to see if you're real. Those are the people worth your energy, not the loudest critics, but the silent students. The freedom in letting go, when I finally let go of the need to be understood by everyone, something unexpected happened. I became more focused, more productive, more effective, because I was no longer splitting my attention between the work and the optics. I was no longer managing 2 projects simultaneously, the actual mission and everyone's perception of the mission. I just focused on the mission, and the mission accelerated. There's an enormous amount of energy trapped in the need for approval, of energy you don't even realize you're spending until you stop spending it. Every time you pause to consider how something will be received, you're fragmenting your focus. Every time you craft a message to preempt criticism, you're designing for defense instead of designing for outcome. Every time you slow down to bring skeptics along, you're matching their pace instead of your own. When you let go of that, when you simply decide, I'm moving at my speed, and whoever can keep up is welcome to join, you unlock a level of momentum most people never experience. Because you're no longer dragging weight. You're no longer translating your vision into language that makes comfortable people comfortable. You're just building. And building is fast when you're not explaining every brick. I felt this most clearly during the hardest years of Tesla and SpaceX. On SpaceX. 2008, 2018, moments when both companies were on the edge of failure. Moments when the world was loudly predicting collapse. I didn't have time to explain. I didn't have energy to defend. I just had to solve problems. Hour by hour, decision by decision. And in that pressure, in that necessity, I found a clarity I hadn't accessed before, because there was no room for anything else, no room for justification, no room for performance, just pure problem solving. And we survived, not because I convinced everyone it was possible, but because I stopped trying to. I just made it possible. And possibility doesn't require consensus. It just requires commitment. That experience taught me something permanent, that the best way to answer doubt is not with words. It's with progress. It's with progress. The best way to handle criticism is not with defense. It's with results. And the best way to deal with people who don't believe in you is to stop needing them to. That freedom is available to everyone. But most people won't take it because it requires something uncomfortable. It requires that you become okay with being misunderstood, that you become okay with people thinking you're wrong, that you become okay with moving alone when necessary. Most people can't handle that. They need the crowd's approval too much. They need external validation to feel secure in their choices, and that need keeps them trapped. Trapped in explanation, trapped in justification, trapped in other people's pace. What I say instead. Now you might be wondering, if you don't explain yourself, what do you say? When people ask. It's simple. I redirect, I reframe, I set boundaries without apology, and I found a few responses that work consistently, not because they convince people, but because they end unproductive conversations quickly. When someone asks, "Why are you doing?" I often respond with, "Because it needs to be done." That's it. No elaboration, no defense. Just a statement of necessity. If they push further, if they say, "But don't you think?" I cut it off. I've already considered that. And I move on, not rudely, but firmly. Because I'm not interested in relitigating decisions I've already made. When someone questions my timeline, my approach, my strategy, I don't justify. I clarify scope. Are you on the team? If the answer is no, then I appreciate your concern. But this isn't a decision you're part of. If the answer is yes, then we talk. Because team members deserve context, random observers do not. When someone challenges my priorities, implies I should be doing something different, I ask them a simple question. Are you willing to live with the consequences of that choice? The answer is always no, because they're not offering to carry the weight. They're just offering opinions from a position of safety, and opinions from safety are worthless. So I thank them politely and disregard completely. This might sound harsh to some people. They might think I'm dismissive. But here's what they don't understand. Boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are clarity. When I decline to explain myself, I'm not saying you don't matter. This conversation doesn't serve either of us. I'm protecting both my energy and their time. Because explaining to someone who's not open to understanding is a waste for both parties. The people who matter in my life understand this. They don't take my brevity as rejection. They take it as respect. Respect for their intelligence. Respect for the fact that they don't need me to justify every move. They trust the process because they trust the person. And that trust is not built through constant explanation. It's built through consistent action. The relationships that survive, here's what happened when I stopped explaining myself. Some relationships ended. Quickly, loudly. People who were used to having input suddenly didn't. People who were used to feeling central to my decision making suddenly weren't. And they couldn't handle it. They called it arrogance. They called it isolation. They called it a mistake. Then they left. And I let them. But their relationships deepened. The people who stayed were different. They didn't need constant access to my thought process to feel secure. They didn't need me to justify my time allocation to feel valued. They didn't measure their importance by how much I explained. They measured it by the quality of the time we did share, by the mutual respect, by the understanding that we were both autonomous people choosing to connect, not dependent people needing to merge. Those relationships are the ones that last, because they're built on respect, not need. They're built on trust, not control. They're built on the understanding that sometimes the people we care about make choices we don't fully understand, and that's okay. We don't need to understand everything. We just need to trust that they're moving with intention. And if we're truly close to them, we'll see the results eventually. And the results will make sense even if the process didn't. I have a small circle now, much smaller than it used to be, but the people in it are solid. They're builders, they're thinkers, they're people who move with purpose. And none of them need me to explain why I work the hours I work, why I take the risks I take, why I pursue the goals I pursue. They get it, not because I told them, but because they operate the same way. We recognize each other, and that recognition is enough. This is the trade. You lose quantity. You gain quality. You lose the crowd. You gain the committed. You lose the people who were never really with you. You gain clarity about who actually is. And that clarity is worth everything. Because when you're surrounded by people who don't require constant justification, you can move faster. Think clearer. Build bigger. You're not managing personalities. You're not navigating egos. You're just working. With people who work toward things that matter. If someone can't handle your refusal to explain, they're telling you something important. They're telling you they need control more than they need connection. They're telling you their comfort matters more to them than your autonomy. They're telling you that the relationship was conditional on your compliance. And that's not a relationship worth maintaining. On if you want to build anything significant. Not if you want to live at your capacity. Not if you want to stop performing for approval and start performing for results. The difference between confidence and arrogance people often confuse not explaining yourself with arrogance. They think if you're not justifying your choices, you must think you're better than everyone else. But that's not what this is. This is not about superiority. This is about stewardship. Stewardship of your energy, your time, your focus. You have a finite amount, and you get to decide where it goes. Arrogance says, I'm right, and you're wrong. Confidence says, I'm moving forward, and you're welcome to join or not. Arrogance needs to prove itself. Confidence simply is. Arrogance defends. Confidence redirects. Arrogance argues. Confidence builds. Massive difference. There's a massive difference. And most people who accuse you of arrogance when you stop explaining are actually uncomfortable with your confidence, because confidence doesn't give them leverage. I'm confident in my reasoning, not because I think I'm infallible. I've been wrong many times. They'd be wrong again. But I'm confident in my process. I gather information. I consult experts. I run models. I test assumptions. I make the best decision I can with the information available. And then I commit fully, and I adjust based on feedback from reality, not from opinion. That process doesn't require public approval. It requires discipline. It requires humility in the face of data. It requires ego removal when the evidence contradicts my hypothesis. But it doesn't require that I explain myself to every person who has a question, because most questions are not about understanding my process. They're about inserting their opinion into my process, and I don't have room for that. Not because their opinion is worthless, but because inserting too many opinions into a decision-making process creates noise, and noise prevents signal. And signal is what you need to make good decisions. So when I don't explain, I'm not being arrogant. I'm being protective of the clarity I need to think well. Protective of the focus I need to act decisively. Protective of the space required for my process to work. And if someone interprets that protection as arrogance, that's a signal that they don't understand the nature of focus. A signal that they've never built something that required that level of concentration. A signal that they're operating from a place of leisure while I'm operating from a place of necessity. I'm building electric cars that can compete with century-old automotive companies. I'm building rockets that can make humanity multiplanetary. I'm building neural interfaces that might one day solve paralysis. These are not small projects. They're not hobbies. They're missions that require every ounce of focus I can generate. And I will not dilute that focus to make people comfortable with my confidence. I will not apologize for protecting the mental space I need to solve hard problems. And I will not slow down to bring along people who are more interested in commentary than contribution. The peace you find here is what I didn't expect when I stopped explaining myself. Peace. Deep, structural peace. The kind that comes from alignment between your inner conviction and your outer action. The kind that comes from no longer being at war with other people's perceptions. The kind that comes from finally accepting that you can't control what people think, so you might as well stop trying. I used to care deeply about being understood. I used to think that if people just knew my reasoning, they'd support me. But understanding doesn't create support. Creates support. Shared vision creates support. Shared commitment creates support. And those things can't be explained into existence. They either exist or they don't. And if they don't, no amount of explanation will create them. Once I accepted that, the pressure lifted. I stopped feeling responsible for other people's comprehension. I stopped feeling guilty when people misunderstood my intentions. Stopped feeling frustrated when my reasoning didn't land, because their understanding was never my responsibility. My responsibility was to think clearly, decide wisely, and act consistently. That's it. Everything else was noise. And in that piece, I found capacity. Capacity I didn't know I had, because I wasn't spending it on managing perceptions. I wasn't spending it on defending decisions. I wasn't spending it on translating my world into language that made sense to people who would never enter it anyway. I was just spending it on the work, and the work responded. It accelerated. It deepened. It became more effective. Because it finally had my full attention. This is what I want you to understand. Explaining yourself constantly is not generosity. It's self-sabotage. It's a tax on your potential. Every moment you spend justifying your choices to people who don't share your responsibility is a moment you're not spending advancing your mission. And missions don't advance on explanation. They advance on execution. So stop explaining. Start executing. Stop justifying. Start building. Stop defending your vision. Start proving it. The people who are supposed to understand will understand through your results. The people who are supposed to join you will join you through your momentum. And the people who are supposed to leave will leave when they realize you're not slowing down for them. That's not loss. That's not loss. That's clarity. And clarity, once you have it, feels like freedom. My final words to you, if you're still listening, I want to say this directly. You don't owe anyone an explanation for the life you're building. You don't owe them justification for your ambitions. You don't owe them comfort in the face of your choices. What you owe is this: integrity with yourself, honesty about what you're capable of, commitment to becoming the person who can achieve what you envision. The world will ask you to slow down. It will ask you to be reasonable. Yeah. It will ask you to consider how your choices make other people feel, and you can listen to those requests if you want. But know that every time you do, you're choosing someone else's pace over your own. You're choosing their comfort over your potential. And their comfort over your potential. You're choosing to be understood over being effective. I chose effectiveness. I chose building over explaining. I chose results over reputation. And yes, it cost me. It cost me relationships. It cost me popularity. It cost me the approval of people I once wanted to impress. But it gave me something far more valuable. It gave me Mars missions. It gave me electric vehicle revolution. It gave me progress toward a future I actually want to live in. And when I'm standing on Mars someday, I won't be thinking about the people who doubted me. I'll be thinking about the few who believed, the few who didn't need explanation, the few who saw the vision and said, let's build. Those are my people, and if you're listening to this, you might be one of them. So stop explaining yourself to people who will never get it. Stop defending your dreams to people who don't have any of their own. Stop slowing down for people who aren't willing to run. Just move, build, create, prove, and let your life be the explanation. If this resonated with you, if you're one of the people who's tired of justifying your ambition, type Elon Musk in the comments below. That's how we recognize each other. That's how we find our people. Not the ones who need us to explain, but the ones who already understand because they're doing the same thing, building in silence, moving with purpose, refusing to negotiate their potential with people who have none. I don't explain myself anymore, not because I'm better than anyone, but because I have work to do. And that work is more important than anyone's opinion of it, including yours, including mine. The work is what matters, the mission is what matters, and everything else is just noise. So turn down the noise, build something real. The world doesn't need more explanations. It needs more builders. You won.